The people of Red Creek had seen many strange mornings, but nothing like the moment they spotted the sheriff's young wife running barefoot through the pale light of dawn. Emily Carter never rushed anywhere. She moved like someone afraid to wake the dust. But that morning, her white nightdress was torn, her hair tangled, and panic clung to her face like a shadow she couldn't escape. She crossed Main Street fast, stumbling once, then pushing herself toward the tall grass stretching out in the direction of the old Dawson Ranch. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. A woman only ran like that when she was escaping something she had endured too long. Emily was 24, soft-spoken, always covered up even when the summer heat felt sharp enough to cut skin. Married to Sheriff William Carter, a man twice her age who talked about law like he held it in his fist. Folks had always whispered that Emily looked more like a frightened niece than a wife, but no one said it out loud. Not when the sheriff could hear. But the man she ran toward that morning wasn't someone the town trusted either. Luke Dawson, 48, a rancher who lived alone on a stretch of sunburned prairie outside Red Creek. Tall, quiet, rough around the edges. He came into town just enough to restock supplies and left before people could ask questions. Folks claimed they heard strange sounds from his land after dark. Long echoes in the wind they blamed on loneliness or something worse. Months earlier, Emily had crossed paths with Luke when her horse went lame near his land. He didn't say much, just crouched in the dirt and fixed the shoe with slow, patient hands. When he stepped away, it was like he didn't want anything from her. His eyes had been steady, gentle even, and she had carried that small kindness like a secret in her pocket. Maybe that was why she ran in that direction now, with fear pushing her forward and hope tugging her feet. When the sun climbed higher, Sheriff Carter burst into the street shouting that Luke Dawson had taken his wife. Taken her by force. Taken her because he was the kind of man capable of anything. And the town believed him without hesitation, because fear made people loyal to the loudest voice. Within an hour, riders were saddled. Men grabbed rifles, muttered curses, and followed the trail Emily had left behind. But even as they moved out, there was something they couldn't ignore. Every person who had seen Emily at dawn remembered the same thing. She ran toward Dawson Ranch, not away. She didn't scream. She didn't crawl. She didn't look back. She chose that direction. By mid-morning, Red Creek buzzed like a kicked hive. Folks whispered that Emily was still missing, and the sheriff wasted no time riling men up, insisting Luke had dragged her off the trail. No one questioned why she would run to the one man the town feared. They just let the sheriff's rage guide their thinking. Near the river, the riders found hoofprints pressed deep into the mud and a torn scrap of Emily's blue dress caught on a branch. To them, that was enough. They had their villain. They pushed on until the Dawson Ranch came into view, the yard silent, the air thick with nerves. When they kicked open the barn door, sunlight spilled across a scene that made their hearts hammer harder. Emily lay on an old cot, her skin burning with fever, a bloody cloth pressed against her side where a deep gash glowed, angry and red. Her wrist was wrapped in a strip of cloth, hiding raw rope burns. A wooden table lay on its side, tools scattered across the dirt like the aftermath of a struggle. Luke stood beside her, a knife in one hand and torn linen in the other. A scratch marked his arm. To the riders, the story wrote itself in an instant. They didn't pause. They didn't ask. They tackled him to the floor, dragged him outside, tied his hands behind his back. Dust filled the air as he struggled to speak. "I didn't take her," he said, voice low and steady. "She ran here." But fear was louder. Emily was carried back to town half-conscious. Luke was locked in a cell behind the courthouse. People crowded around the window, calling him a monster, convinced they had finally caught one. They didn't know that the truth, like Emily, was still fighting to breathe. The sun had barely settled above the rooftops when Red Creek turned into a storm of whispers. By then, Emily Carter lay in the doctor's office with a fever climbing through her body, and Luke Dawson sat in a cramped cell staring at the dirt floor like a man already judged. Folks gathered outside in tight clusters, passing rumors back and forth like trading cards, each story darker than the last. and all of it pointed in the same direction: blame the rancher. But inside the doctor's office, the truth was slowly beginning to show itself. Old Dr. Harris had delivered half the county's children and buried the other half. He had seen pain in all shapes, but something about Emily's condition made his hands pause. When he unwrapped the cloth around her wrist, he didn't see marks from a single night of violence. He saw rope burns that had been aggravated, layered with older bruises along her ribs and arms, yellowing beneath the new ones. Not the kind of injuries a man like Luke could have made in a single night. These were the marks of a home where fear lived quietly. Judge Carter, no, Sheriff Carter, stood by her bedside trying to play the part of the grieving husband. He told the doctor she was confused, frightened, out of her mind with fever. But Emily flinched each time his voice rose, shrinking into the cot like the sound itself bruised her. When she whispered something, the sheriff stepped closer, hoping to hear a confession that supported his outrage. But Dr. Harris leaned in first and caught the words. Not Luke. Not him. She repeated it, barely a breath, over and over, as if trying to push the truth through a locked door. The sheriff stiffened, his jaw clenching as if her voice betrayed him. He snapped at the doctor, claiming she didn't know what she was saying. But Dr. Harris saw her eyes, clear, terrified, begging someone to believe her. And his hands, steady from decades of stitching and delivering life, trembled with the weight of what he now suspected. Later that evening, he stepped onto the boardwalk outside his office. The street lamps glowed like candles in the dusk. He walked over to the general store where Tom Wilson, the store owner, swept dust off his porch. With a voice kept low, the doctor shared what he had seen. The old bruises, the rope burns that didn't belong in a marriage bed, the fear in Emily's eyes. Tom stopped sweeping, his face tightening with something close to anger but not yet spoken aloud. As they talked, Mrs. Langley, the widow who lived across from the sheriff's home, stepped closer. Her voice wavered, but her words were sharp. She said she had heard shouting late at night from that fine white house. She had seen Emily once collapse in the yard, clutching her side. The sheriff had told the neighbors she fainted from heat. But the widow had seen the truth in the girl's shaking hands. Pieces of doubt began to settle in the minds of the townsfolk, quietly, cautiously, like dust gathering in corners where no one had looked before. Inside the doctor's office, Emily stirred again. Dr. Harris gently helped her sit up. Her breath trembled as she said the same words she had fought to say all day. Not Luke. He didn't hurt me. Dr. Harris asked softly. Emily, who did? Her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. She whispered, exhausted, my husband. The doctor froze. His glasses slid down his nose. Emily didn't rush, didn't panic. She simply let the truth spill like something she'd held too long. She spoke of tying herself near the barn at Dawson Ranch so she wouldn't wander off into the prairie when the fever struck again. She told him Luke had cut her free, carried her inside, and tried to clean her wound. She said she'd knocked the table over when the fever made her thrash and scratched him when he tried to calm her. He saved me, she whispered, and they're going to hang him for it. Back at the courthouse, Luke Dawson sat still in his cell. He heard voices outside, cold ones, confident ones, repeating stories of the monster they believed he was. Yet he didn't defend himself anymore. He knew the town had already chosen who to believe, and he knew the one voice that mattered was too weak to be heard over the crowd. But that voice was growing stronger, and soon, Red Creek would hear it whether it wanted to or not. Morning crept slowly into Red Creek, but no one felt its warmth. People gathered in the town square like they were waiting for a storm they themselves had created. Luke Dawson stood tied to a post in the center, dust settling on his shoulders, wrists raw from the rope. He didn't fight. He didn't spit or shout. He just stood there with the quiet heaviness of a man who had already accepted that truth meant nothing when fear had a louder voice. Some folks couldn't look at him for long. They weren't sure whether they were looking at a criminal or a mistake they weren't ready to admit. Others stared hard, wanting so desperately to see a monster that they forced themselves to imagine one. Sheriff William Carter stepped out of the courthouse wearing his best coat, the buttons gleaming like he polished them just for the show. He walked with a limp now, though no one remembered him limping the day before. He put a hand on his lower back, pretending pain, pretending grief. And the crowd leaned toward him like he was the only truth left in town. "He took my wife," he announced, voice trembling at the edges, but not with sadness. With performance. "He took her, hurt her, and would have killed her if we hadn't found her." A murmur rolled across the crowd. People nodded, because nodding was easier than thinking. Sheriff Carter raised his arm dramatically toward Luke. "Look at him. Look at the scratches. Look at the rope burns on her wrist. You all saw the girl, barely breathing, fevered, terrified. That didn't happen by accident." Luke lifted his head, just slightly, eyes calm, tired. His voice was low, worn thin. "I never touched her in anger." Some shook their heads, refusing to hear. Others stared at the sheriff, waiting for him to continue, waiting for him to give them permission to keep believing the wrong thing. Dr. Harris pushed through the crowd then, his old boots scraping the wooden steps as he climbed onto the platform. His face held something the town wasn't used to seeing, a quiet kind of fury. "I need to speak," he said. The sheriff stiffened. "This isn't the time, doctor." "It's exactly the time." For a moment, just one heartbeat, the square went still. The doctor spoke plainly. "Emily's injuries didn't come from that ranch. They didn't come from last night. They are old, repeated, and they tell a different story than the one you're selling." A ripple of unease ran through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Old marks?" Another said, "He never said that." The sheriff's jaw tensed so hard his teeth clicked. "You're mistaken," he barked. "My wife." Then something unexpected cut him off. A small boy, Sam, the doctor's young apprentice, came running from the far end of the square. His voice cracked as he shouted, "She's awake. Emily's awake. She wants to talk." Silence fell again, heavier this time. The sheriff's face drained of color, like someone had yanked the script out of his hands. They carried Emily out on a wooden chair because she could barely stand. Her hair stuck to her damp skin, her breath shaky. But her eyes, those soft, frightened eyes that had been quiet for months, finally looked alive with something stronger than fear. She searched the square until she found Luke. For a moment, everything else faded, even the crowd. He lowered his gaze, almost ashamed she had to see him tied like an animal. Emily swallowed hard. "He saved me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. People leaned in closer. "I ran to him. I wasn't taken." A few faces in the crowd shifted. Some eyes widened, others narrowed with confusion. "The knife was for my wound," she said slowly, as if each word scraped her throat. "The rope burns. I did those to myself. I tied myself so I wouldn't wander off when the fever got bad." Someone near the front sucked in a breath. Emily lifted her trembling hand. "He only tried to help me, and you're about to hang the only man who's ever shown me kindness." Sheriff Carter lunged forward suddenly, grabbing her wrist with a force that made her cry out. "Stop this," he shouted, voice cracking. "You're confused. You don't know what you're saying." The crowd froze. It wasn't the words that trapped their breath. It was the look on Emily's face. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She folded in on herself like she'd done this 1,000 times. Like she expected the pain. For men stepped in at once, pulling the sheriff off her. Their hands shook, not from fear, but from the realization of something they hadn't wanted to believe. The sheriff didn't stop fighting. He shouted about loyalty, marriage, duty. But the more he yelled, the smaller he looked. The more people stepped away from him, and the more they looked toward Luke, whose calm silence now felt like truth. Emily turned her face toward Luke again, tears gathering at her lashes. Her voice came out soft but steady. "Please untie him." Dr. Harris didn't wait for permission. He cut the rope from Luke's wrists. Luke rubbed the red marks, then walked toward Emily with slow, careful steps. He didn't touch her until she leaned into him first. "You should have stayed resting," he murmured. 2 simple words, but the whole town heard the sincerity in them. Something steady, something real, something the sheriff had never once shown her. And for the first time in a long time, Red Creek began to see clear. The sheriff's shouts still echoed in the square long after men dragged him back, but the crowd stood frozen, uncertain of what happened next. Red Creek had always relied on loud voices to guide them. Now they were left with silence, and silence forced people to think. Luke Dawson stood beside Emily, his hands free, though the rope marks still burned red around his wrists. He didn't try to defend himself. He didn't look for pity. He only looked at her, steady, careful, as if the whole world might shatter if he spoke too loud. Dr. Harris knelt beside Emily's chair. "You did well, child," he murmured. "We heard you." Emily nodded weakly, but her eyes were fixed on the sheriff across the square. He struggled against the men holding him, face twisted with shame and fury. "You think she's telling the truth?" he spat. "She's sick. She's delirious. And you," his eyes darted to Luke, "you fed her lies." Luke's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed calm. "You broke her long before that fever did." The sheriff barked a laugh, sharp, humorless, desperate. "You think you know anything about her? About marriage? She's my wife." Emily flinched. Luke saw it. He stepped forward, not aggressive, not reckless, but with a quiet strength that made the crowd shift back instinctively. "You don't get to call her that," Luke said. His voice carried across the square, not loud, but firm enough that even the horses tied nearby stopped stirring. "A husband protects. A husband listens. A husband doesn't leave marks on a woman's ribs." The sheriff sneered. "You're accusing me? You? A man who's lived alone for 20 years? What do you know about anything except talking to cattle and ghosts?" Luke didn't blink. Enough to know she came to my ranch running for her life. The sheriff pointed at Emily, shaking with rage. "She owes me the truth. Emily, look at me. Tell them I'm right." Emily's breath hitched. Her fingers dug into the arms of the chair. For a moment, she looked like she might fold again, like she might retreat into the quiet place where she'd lived for too long. But then she lifted her chin. Her voice cracked, but the words were strong. "I don't owe you anything." The crowd murmured, shifting like wind through dry grass. Emily's eyes glistened with tears, but none of them fell. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "Every day in some way. And every time I cried, you said it was my fault, that I misunderstood, that I was too sensitive. I believed you because I wanted to, because I didn't know how to stop being afraid of you." Something inside the sheriff snapped. "You ungrateful." Dr. Harris stood sharply. "Enough," the sheriff snarled. "This town owes me respect." "No," Tom Wilson shouted back from the front of the crowd. "Respect isn't something you beat out of people." A few others murmured agreement. The sheriff looked around wildly, realizing for the first time that the town wasn't with him anymore. His voice softened to a trembling plea, not out of love, but fear of losing power. "Emily, come home. Please, don't do this to me." Her answer was simple. "I'm already gone." The sheriff lunged again, but this time 10 hands grabbed him, wrestled him down, tied his wrists behind his back with the same rope that had been around Luke's. "You have no right," he yelled, twisting in the dirt. "I'm the law." "No," Dr. Harris said quietly. "You were the law." Luke stepped closer to Emily, his voice gentle. "You don't have to talk anymore." He touched the back of her chair lightly. "You're safe now." Her breathing steadied, slow, shaky, but real. She looked at him with something close to relief. For a long moment, the crowd didn't know what to do. No one cheered. No one clapped. It felt wrong somehow, too raw, too human. You didn't celebrate truth when it came from a wound. You let it settle. You let it breathe. Tom Wilson broke the silence. "We need a doctor to watch her, and a cell to hold him." 2 men lifted the sheriff, who cursed and kicked all the way to the courthouse steps. A few townsfolk watched with stunned faces, trying to reconcile the man they had once trusted with the man they had just seen exposed. Emily tried to stand, but her legs trembled. Luke didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and offered his arm. "I've got you," he said softly. She leaned into him, exhausted but unbroken. The square watched the 2 of them, one bruised and fragile, the other worn and weathered, moving away from the chaos that had nearly destroyed them both. And for the first time, Red Creek felt the weight of the truth it had almost ignored. The sheriff's screams faded behind them as Luke guided Emily back toward the doctor's office. The evening sun dipped low, turning the dirt road gold, but neither of them felt the warmth. Emily kept her hand wrapped lightly around Luke's forearm, her steps slow and uneven. Every few breaths, She winced as the wound at her side tightened, but she didn't complain. She was used to hiding pain, too used to it. Luke felt her grip tremble, and he slowed even more. "Tell me if it hurts," he said quietly. "It already hurts," she whispered, trying to smile. "But I'm walking. That's enough." He didn't smile back. His eyes flicked over her face, taking in every sign of discomfort. He'd seen injured horses with more rest than she'd ever gotten. When they reached the doctor's porch, Luke helped her sit before she collapsed. Dr. Harris followed close behind, breathless not from age, but from the weight of everything he had carried in silence. The doctor crouched beside her. "Let's get you inside," he said gently. "You need rest, not crowds." Emily's gaze drifted toward the square, where people were still gathered in tight groups, whispering in low, shaken voices. "They all watched," she murmured. "They all believed him." "They believed the loudest man," Luke said, "not the truest one." She looked at him with tired eyes. "And you? Why did you believe me?" Luke shifted, unsure how to answer. He rubbed the back of his neck, a small sign of nerves few people ever saw in him. "Because you ran to me," he said simply. "People don't run toward danger. They run toward whatever feels like hope." Emily swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "I didn't think I'd make it. I thought I'd fall before I reached your gate. But you didn't." Luke's voice softened. "You made it. You fought for your life." She opened her mouth to respond, but emotion rose too quickly, choking her words. She looked away, blinking fast. Inside, the doctor cleaned her wound again, each breath from Emily sharp and short. Luke stood by the door, watching, his hands clenched so tight the knuckles whitened. He wanted to look away every time she winced, but he didn't. She had suffered enough alone. She wouldn't suffer alone now. When the doctor stepped aside to boil fresh water, Emily shifted her gaze to Luke. "They're going to talk about me," she said quietly. "About all of this. They'll say things that aren't true." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely. "Let them talk. Folks talk to fill empty air. Doesn't mean the air is right." A tiny laugh escaped her, a tired, broken little sound. "You don't say much, do you?" "No," he admitted. "Most words aren't worth saying. But the ones you do say—" She hesitated, her cheeks warming slightly. "They matter." Luke felt his chest tighten, not painfully, but in a way he hadn't felt in years. He stepped closer, stopping a few feet from her. "Emily, what happened today? None of that should have been yours to carry." "I know." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "But it was—" "And I kept quiet for so long, because I kept hoping he'd go back to being the man he pretended to be." Luke shook his head slowly. "People don't pretend that well. Not for that long. Not unless the whole town helps them." Emily looked up, startled by the honesty in his voice. "Are you angry?" "At them." "At him," Luke answered. "And maybe at myself." "Yourself?" she whispered. Luke exhaled, long and low. "You came to my ranch with a wound that could have killed you. And all I could think was, why didn't I see it sooner? Why didn't anybody?" Emily reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his hand. Her touch was warm, gentle, almost apologetic. "Luke, no one saw because I hid it. I made excuses for him. I told everyone I was clumsy, tired, confused. I even believed myself sometimes." Her voice trembled. "You didn't fail me." His hand closed around hers, steady and careful. "You're safe now," he said. "That's what matters." Dr. Harris returned then, clearing his throat politely, as if he'd interrupted something fragile. "Luke," he said, "she needs rest. Real rest. Not just sitting. She shouldn't be alone tonight." Emily's breath caught. "I don't want him near me," she whispered quickly, fear flickering through her eyes. The doctor shook his head. "He won't be near you. He's locked in a cell with 2 deputies watching him. I meant you shouldn't be alone because fever can turn fast. I'll stay nearby." "And Luke," the doctor glanced at him, "you mind sitting in the next room? Just in case." Luke nodded without hesitation. "I'll stay." Emily relaxed, her breathing easing. "Thank you," she whispered. As the night deepened, Luke sat in the adjoining room, elbows on his knees, listening to every faint sound coming from where she rested. Every sigh, every rustle made his heart tighten. Not in romance, not in longing, but in something deeper, something protective, something he didn't dare to find yet. Red Creek outside the window had gone quiet, almost guilty. People weren't celebrating, weren't gossiping loudly anymore. They were thinking, and thinking was the first step toward change. But change never came easy, and the hardest part of the story was still coming. Night settled over Red Creek like a heavy blanket, but no one in the doctor's office slept. Emily drifted in and out, her breaths uneven, the fever pulling her up and dragging her back down. In the next room, Luke sat in a wooden chair that creaked every time he shifted. He didn't dare leave. Every sound from her room made his shoulders tense. Sometime near midnight, Emily whimpered, a soft, strangled sound. Luke was on his feet before he knew he'd moved. He stepped into the doorway, careful not to frighten her. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe." Emily blinked awake, eyes glassy. "Luke!" Her voice cracked, small and scared. Is he here?" "No," Luke answered, stepping closer so she could see him clearly. "He's locked up. He can't get near you." Her breath shook. "He always gets near me." Luke lowered himself to her side, moving slowly so she wouldn't feel trapped. "Not anymore." Emily looked at him with a kind of exhaustion that wasn't physical. It was the exhaustion of someone who had carried fear like a second skin. "I keep hearing his voice," she whispered, "even when it's quiet." Luke didn't try to comfort her with easy words. Instead, he spoke softly, steady, the way someone speaks to a frightened animal, patiently, truthfully. "You're hearing what your mind isn't ready to let go of yet," he said. "Give it time. It'll quiet down." A tear slid down her cheek. "I don't know how to live without fear," she confessed. "I don't even know what it feels like." Luke hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you want to learn?" Emily looked at him for a long moment. "I do," she whispered. I don't know where to start." "You start," Luke said, "by letting someone stand between you and the things that scare you." Her lips trembled. "Why would you do that for me?" He leaned back slightly, eyes softening. "Because you ran to me," he said, "and I know how much strength that must have taken." Emily closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking deep. "I didn't think you'd open the door," she whispered. Luke's jaw tightened. "Then I've failed at something important." She shook her head. "No, you didn't fail me. You're the only one who didn't." The room fell quiet, filled with unspoken truths that neither dared put into words yet. Just when the silence became heavy, the front door slammed open, rattling the walls. Dr. Harris jolted awake in his chair across the hall. Luke's hand went instantly to the knife sitting on the table beside him. Deputy Collins burst into the doorway, chest heaving, eyes wide. "Luke," he gasped. "Doc, come quick." The doctor hurried forward. "What's wrong?" "It's Carter," the deputy panted. "He's demanding to see her. He won't stop yelling. He says she's his wife and he has a right." Emily flinched so violently her whole body curled in on itself. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." Luke moved in front of her automatically, blocking her view of the doorway. His voice dropped low, dangerous. "He's not stepping foot in here." Collins nodded, swallowing hard. "We got him tied, but he's losing his mind. Keeps saying he'll drag her home, even if he has to." He stopped himself, glancing at Emily. Luke's voice sharpened. "Say it." The deputy swallowed. "Even if he has to break her bones to do it." Emily covered her mouth as a sob escaped her. Luke stood up slowly, too slowly, and the room seemed to shrink around him. Something cold and steady settled in his eyes. "I'm going with you." Dr. Harris stepped between them quickly. "Luke, wait. You can't confront him. Not like this." Luke didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He threatened her. "Yes," the doctor said, "and that's why we don't let him near her. Not why we let you walk into a trap he'd enjoy." Emily reached for Luke's sleeve, her hand shaking. "Please don't go," she whispered. "If he sees you, he'll make things worse. He'll twist it. He always twists everything." Luke turned toward her, and something softened on his face, something fragile and protective all at once. He took her hand gently, holding it between both of his like it was something delicate. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not while you're scared. Not while he's out there yelling your name like he owns you." Emily's voice cracked. "He doesn't." Luke nodded once. "I know, and he's going to learn that. Dr. Harris cleared his throat, softer now. Let me talk to him first. Let the deputies deal with him. Emily doesn't need another fight right now. Luke hesitated. His chest rose and fell slowly. He looked at Emily, at her bruises, her trembling breaths, her hope held together by thin threads, and finally nodded. Fine, he said, but if he gets one step closer to her, I'll finish what he started. The deputy's eyes widened slightly at the quiet threat, but he didn't argue. When they left the room, Emily held on to Luke's sleeve for one last second, whispering, "Don't let him hurt anyone else." Luke touched her shoulder carefully. "Not tonight," he promised. Then he stepped into the hallway, jaw clenched, ready for whatever waited outside. And for the first time in years, the sheriff wasn't the one people feared anymore. The hallway outside the doctor's office felt tight, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Luke followed Deputy Collins toward the back of the courthouse, each step slow and deliberate. His boots hit the floor with a steady rhythm, controlled, restrained, because everything inside him wanted to run, to break through the door and silence the sheriff with his own hands. But he remembered Emily's trembling whisper, "Don't let him hurt anyone else." That was the only thing stopping him. When they reached the cell block, Sheriff Carter's voice filled the air like the snarl of a cornered animal. "You think you can keep me away from her?" he shouted, jerking against the bars. "She's my wife. I have rights. I have claims. She belongs to me." Two deputies flanked the cell, trying to calm him, but he only got louder when he saw Luke enter. "There he is," Carter spat. "The ranch rat. The stray dog she ran to. You think saving her one night makes you a hero? It makes you a fool." Luke didn't flinch. He stepped forward until the bars were only a foot away. "Keep talking," he said quietly. "Every word you say makes it clearer why she ran." Carter lunged forward, grabbing the bars so hard his knuckles turned pale. "You stole her from me." "You lost her all by yourself," Luke replied. The sheriff's laugh came out bitter and sharp. "You don't know a damn thing. She's weak. Always has been. Crying over nothing. Needing attention. A man can't run a house when his wife is always broken." Luke's jaw tightened, eyes darkening. "You broke her," he said, "and you enjoyed it." The sheriff leaned in, his face inches from Luke's. "You think she's going to choose you now? You think she's going to run into your arms and forget the vows she made? She'll come back. She always does. Fear does that to a woman." Luke's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "She's not afraid of you anymore." Carter's eyes twitched, just a flicker, but Luke caught it. "Even if she thinks she's free," Carter hissed, "she isn't. I know her better than she knows herself. She'll fold. She always folds." "She didn't fold today," Luke said. "She stood up to you today." The sheriff's lips curled in disgust. "She embarrassed me today." Luke looked him dead in the eye. "She told the truth." "The truth." Carter barked out a harsh laugh. "Women don't know truth. They know panic. They know how to twist things. They know how to play victim when they're caught." Luke stepped even closer, voice low and steady. "You want to know what I see? I see a man terrified that the person he controlled finally learned how to speak." Something snapped in Carter's expression. Something dark, something feral. "I'll get out of here," he growled. "And when I do, I'll take her home. She'll see she has nowhere else to go. Not with you. Not with anyone." Luke didn't raise his voice, but every word hit like a hammer. "She's not going back to you. Not now. Not ever. And who's going to stop me?" Carter spat. "You?" Luke's eyes hardened into steel. "If I have to." Deputy Collins stepped between them, then, sensing something dangerous in the air. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Both of you." Carter sneered at the deputy. "Get this ranch trash out of my sight." But Luke didn't move. Not yet. He leaned in, speaking so quietly only Carter could hear. "You listen to me. Emily isn't yours. She's not an object. She's not a possession. And the next time you try to reach her, even with words, I'll make sure you can't reach anything ever again." Carter stiffened, fury twisting his features. "You're threatening me?" "No," Luke said, calm and final. "I'm telling you the truth." The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. The sheriff sputtered, fists shaking, but the bars between them stayed firm. Collins gently tugged Luke's sleeve. "Come on," he murmured. "Emily needs you, not him." Luke gave Carter one last, cold look, then turned and walked away, each step carrying the promise he had just spoken. Back at the doctor's office, Emily sat up when she heard Luke returning. Her hands trembled, not from fever this time, but from dread. "What happened?" she whispered. Luke knelt beside her, looking her straight in the eyes. "I talked to him," he said. Emily swallowed. "What did he say?" Luke hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "He said things that don't matter anymore, because they're not true, and because he's not getting near you again." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared, Luke." "I know," he said softly, "but you're not alone." Emily's fingers curled around his hand, fragile but purposeful. "Will you stay?" she asked. Luke nodded. "All night," he said. "And tomorrow. And the day after, if you need." Emily closed her eyes, leaning her head gently toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. For the first time, I believed that. And in the quiet that followed, something shifted inside both of them. Not romance, not rescue, something deeper. Something like the beginning of a life rebuilt from ruins. Morning returned to Red Creek slowly, as if unsure whether it was welcome after everything the town had witnessed. The doctor's office sat quiet, touched by the soft gold light slipping through the windows. Emily woke with her head resting slightly against the pillows, her breathing steadier than it had been in days. She blinked toward the doorway and found Luke sitting in the same wooden chair, arms crossed loosely, chin lowered as he fought sleep. "Did you stay awake all night?" she asked softly. Luke lifted his head, rubbing a hand across his eyes. "Most of it," he admitted. "Didn't want you waking up alone." A fragile smile curved her lips. "Thank you." He nodded, unsure how to respond to gratitude he didn't think he deserved. A knock sounded at the door. Tom Wilson stepped in, removing his hat. Behind him, the pastor and two other townsmen hovered, not out of curiosity, but out of something gentler. Concern, guilt, a wish to make things right. Tom cleared his throat. "Miss Emily, we wanted to check on you, and to say we're sorry. For everything." He stepped forward, eyes lowered. "We believed what we wanted to believe, not what we should have seen." Emily's brows pulled together, softening. She didn't scold them. She didn't lash out. She simply said, "I just needed someone to listen." The pastor spoke next, his voice low. "The sheriff will face charges. The judge from Clearwater is coming to take over the case. He won't be a danger to you anymore." He paused, glancing at Luke. "To either of you." Emily let out a long breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Luke watched her shoulders drop, watched tension melt away like frost in the sun. When the men left, the doctor stepped into the room, folding his arms. "Emily," he said gently, "now that you're healing, we need to talk about where you'll stay." Emily looked at her hands, twisting the corner of the blanket. "I can't stay here forever." "No," the doctor agreed. "But you're not going back to that house." She nodded slowly. "I know." Luke stayed quiet, not wanting to influence her choice, not wanting her to feel pressured. He kept his eyes on the floor until she spoke again. "Can I stay with you?" she asked. Luke's head lifted sharply. "Only if you want to," he said. "Not because you need a roof. You deserve a choice." "I do want to," Emily whispered. "Not because I'm broken, but because I feel safe with you." Luke swallowed, his voice rough around the edges. "Then you can come to the ranch. As long as you want. For as long as you need." The doctor nodded approvingly. "She'll need help for a while," he said. "And you're steady enough for that, Luke." For the first time in a long time, Emily felt something warm spread inside her. Something like hope, something like the first breath after years of drowning. That afternoon, Luke helped her outside. The town watched from porches and open doors. Not with judgment, not with whispers, but with the quiet respect that came when people finally saw truth instead of rumor. Luke lifted Emily gently onto his horse, climbing up behind her so she wouldn't fall. She leaned back just slightly, letting herself rest against him. "Are you ready?" Luke asked. She looked out toward the open prairie, the tall grass rippling like waves under the wind. "Yes," she said. "For the first time, yes." As they rode toward Dawson Ranch, the town slowly disappeared behind them. But the weight of the past didn't chase her anymore. When they reached the porch, Luke helped her down. She paused, taking in the quiet land, the expanse of sky, the breeze moving through the fields, the steady stillness that lived here. It feels like a place where something good could start, she whispered. Luke nodded. It's a place that doesn't judge, doesn't shout, doesn't hurt. Emily looked at him. What about you? He held her gaze for a long moment. I try not to hurt people who've already been hurt enough. There was no grand confession, no sudden romance. Just two wounded people standing at the edge of a life that might finally let them breathe. Emily took a slow breath. Thank you, Luke, for giving me a place to choose myself. I didn't give you that, he said softly. You took it. She smiled, small but real. Days turned into weeks. Emily healed slowly. Not just the bruises, not just the wound, but the deeper things. Trust. Safety. Her own voice. Some mornings she woke shaking, but Luke was there with steady hands and steady words. Some nights she cried quietly, and Luke sat on the porch with her until she could breathe again. Red Creek learned something too. They learned that fear could blind a whole town. They learned that listening mattered more than judging. And they learned that kindness could come from the quietest man in the room. Emily wasn't the same woman she'd been. She wasn't fragile anymore. She wasn't silent. She was rebuilding herself, piece by piece, with the help of someone who never tried to own her, only understood her. And that was the difference. And the moral of the story? Sometimes the loudest voice is the wrong one. Sometimes a whole town can mistake fear for truth. And sometimes strength isn't found in those who shout the hardest, but in those who stand quietly beside you when the world turns away. If you ever find yourself choosing between fear and kindness, choose the one that doesn't ask you to stay small.